Good morning and welcome to the 41st Annual Winter Star Party.
Hi, I'm Charlie Warren, editor of Amateur Astronomy magazine. I'm here to talk about some of our star people we featured over the last 30 years of publication. I'm Charlie Warren, editor of Amateur Astronomy magazine. I was recently trying to get permission to print one of the, an image, and the guy asked me, "Are you a nonprofit?" And I say, well, we try really hard not to be. Sometimes we fail at that, but no, our magazine's been going for 30 years. And today I want to talk about the people behind it, because to me that's what makes it really, really special. Well, there's a lot of things that make amateur astronomy really special. One of them is like, well, yeah, Richard Wright. So I was sitting down, I've been through this hobby, I've been introduced to some of the most fascinating people I've ever met in my life. I was out in California at an event, and man I know that's a professor said, I want you to come to dinner with us, I have some special people I want you to meet. So I'm sitting down at the table, and these are the people that eventually put together PlaneWave. Everybody familiar with PlaneWave, very high-end telescopes? So anyway, I'm sitting down at this table. These are the people who eventually engineered and made the whole thing. So the guy on the right, yeah, I was an electrical engineer at MIT. This guy, an optical engineer at MIT, mechanical engineer at MIT. I said, I'm Charlie Warren. I know Richard Wright, and I like key lime pie. I mean, what do you say to that? Actually, I grew up kind of in this area, born in Boston, grew up in Miami, Florida, and electrical engineering from University of Miami doesn't carry the weight of MIT. But I want to talk about some of the people. Yeah, there you go. I want to talk about some of the people involved in this hobby, because it really is what makes this, whoop. Yeah, it helps if you don't point at the screen, you point at the computer. But anyway, these are what I call cosmic explorers. Somebody asked me, I thought it said comic explorers, and yeah, there are some of those in here too. But they're people engaged in the art of astronomical pursuit. And I want to start off with the, so to speak, the founder of our feast here. Man, how many of you knew Tippy Dioria? Yeah, he started this star party. So, and first, an explorer is a person who searches for geographic or scientific information, and that's really what we're engaged in here. Some in a more serious way, some less serious, but it's part of what draws us to it. But I want to start with this quote by Tippy, that we call him the celestial pirate. The allure of astronomy is twofold. It compels us both mentally and aesthetically. The thrill of discovery and the majesty of space's colossal beauties are like a magnet to our hearts and minds. Each time we go observing, we find an object or two that could easily be compared to the gems in a giant treasure chest. And each time we look into the chest, we find new and more beautiful jewels. Tippy, if you didn't know Tippy, you can go back. And one of the things that I like about the magazine, essentially it's a journal. I feel kind of like a librarian. So this quote came from our very first issue back in 1994. And so in a way, I'm cataloging and preserving the thoughts of these people, which is the wonderful thing about if you're able to communicate in writing. You can pass it on to the next generations, and people can read your thoughts essentially years and years later. So I know Tippy would enjoy this. So this is another, I was at an astronomy enclave, and you can't talk about astronomy and pass up some kind of humor about our seventh planet from the sun. So yeah, help the astronaut find Uranus. And you definitely can't ignore it if you do any outreach like I do or speak at local schools. It will definitely come up. So passing that, getting on. So where did our magazine come from? Started by Tom Clark, and there were two magazines. You had to have been around for a while, but how many people are familiar with either one of these magazines? No longer, yeah. So Deep Sky was published by David Eicher, the current editor of Astronomy magazine. Telescope Making was published by one of our others. You'll find out in a minute, and we'll go back into that, but he was a former editor of Astronomy magazine. And these were two of Tom Clark's favorite magazines, and they both stopped publishing. And Tom was waiting for somebody to pick up the mantle, and nobody did. Tom was a telescope maker who liked to observe. So he put together this, and if you look, kind of looks a lot like Telescope Making Magazine. That's where he got the idea. So Richard Berry took Richard Berry's idea and some of his authors and started out and did this first one. Well, in the very first issue, and I thought this was appropriate, Tippy and Patty D'Auria penned this article about what it takes to put together a major star party, and we're the recipients of that many years later. But just to take a moment, not only to put it together to begin with, but to organize it each year takes a tremendous amount of effort, a lot of faith. So thank you to the staff and everybody else. This is a fabulous event, one of my favorite star parties, and it takes a lot of effort. But so Tippy said, there's one more aspect. This is the reason it was worth all the trouble. So one more aspect of amateur astronomy that's unique, and that is the people. If you couple an intellect that is sharp enough to grasp the size and complexity of space with a person that laughs at our monumental insignificance, you are sure to end up with the most amazing people on Earth. It is a combination of all these things that prompts us to work so hard setting up a major star party. And I think, yeah, that's well said. Couldn't say it any better. And again, going back to that first, you record the thoughts of these people who, if you didn't know them, you get to pick up these treasures. Well, the man who started the magazine, Tom Clark, was actually, it's kind of interesting start. So you thought that is, you know, his start was he went and his wife, Jeannie, who was a very serious observer, wanted a telescope. So Tom went to a local observatory and he said, you know, what should I get? Back then, a Coulter 13 was about the biggest thing you could get. Well, Tom ordered it thinking it was going to be like a 13-inch refractor. Well, those of you know, long focal length Coulter, this thing came in with a big box and Tom was like, damn, now I'm going to be sucked into this thing. I'm going to be Jeannie's porter for all these events because she can't carry this herself. Well, he got pretty much hooked on it and got aperture fever like many of us, and eventually built this 42-inch beast there, and that's the observatory that was in Chiefland. But he started making telescopes and enjoyed doing that. His background was as a machinist. And he developed the Chiefland property with a field that I later got to enjoy as well. But it became an astronomy community for a lot of people. They could come in, open to the public, and they actually had electric on the field and everything else. And they had their own star party for a while. And it housed, do you remember, Tim, the date, wasn't there a winter star party up there because of a hurricane or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the years. But there was I think so, yeah, I think so.
18, 19, yeah.
So there was a lot of overlap there, and a lot of these same people were, would be up there. I spent a lot of time with Tippy at the Chiefland property. But so Tom had this big telescope. That's his wife, Jeannie, and Jeannie was a very serious observer. So Tippy's wife and Jeannie and some other very serious observers put together these observing lists that were so serious that Stephen O'Meara, most of you have heard of him, very seriously, he said their observing list for the night looked like a hit list for professional astronomers. So they liked the tough stuff. So I spent more than a little bit of time on that 24-inch. It was kind of nice. I didn't have to cart a scope when I would go to Chiefland. And they sold that property and moved out to New Mexico. Some people ask, how's Tom doing? He's actually doing pretty well. Had a minor stroke, but still observing and doing well. So, well, the other part of this whole star people, and I don't think I mentioned it. So every issue, we feature a profile and do an interview for different people that we find interesting. And what's really, I think, unique about it is sometimes we capture people who go on to do big things, sometimes not, but have a significant piece of our amateur history. Well, Robert Reeves, who is an author and does amazing lunar photography, was the original author of those pieces for us and conducted a lot of the interviews. When I took over, I started doing it. We went back and forth. But Robert is about the most serious lunar student I've ever encountered. This guy, Ewan, what's Ewan's last name? Anyway, he named a lot of the features on the moon. I'm going to talk about Dr. Rick Hill there a little bit and some other people. But Robert Reeves, if you're not familiar, see his incredible high-resolution lunar images. He also did a special on observing the moon in every issue as well. But he was the one who essentially brought this feature of profiling different star people through the years. So a lot of these are contributed to him. Brief plug for his book, if you like lunar observing, and if you haven't observed anybody observe the moon regularly or image? Yeah, it's sometimes a forgotten gem. I mean, we feel all like, and I've been guilty as well. I used to call it the great light polluter. It's like it ruined my deep star, ability to view and image deep star. But it is a worthy target in of itself, and I highly recommend it. It's a really good resource. Again, Robert knows a credible amount about the moon and beautiful plates in that. So you want to get inspired to observe the moon, get his book, Exploring the Moon. So that brings it to me. I actually was featured as one of the star people. Didn't put me on the cover because we didn't want to take subscriptions. But give you a little idea of my background, how to get involved in astronomy, because that's one of the questions we ask. How did you get going? What's your background? This is a strange hobby, and as Richard said, we're kind of a small, subset compared to most hobbies. Model railroad trains. I mean, their subscriptions run in the 300, 400,000. Astronomy is a tiny little community, so kind of unique. Well, my first introduction, I grew up in Miami, Florida. Unusual childhood. I actually lived on a boat. Anybody in this area know Dinner Key Marina? Okay, I lived on a boat, Dinner Key Marina. My dad was a teacher at Ransom, now Ransom Everglades, a private school. And I got to go to school in my little Boston Whaler and catch and pull up. That was a really neat way to, I would tell you, good childhood. But in the summers, we cast off the lines. He was a teacher, and we go to the Bahamas, Virgin Islands. So I grew up with these really dark skies. We didn't have a generator. So at night, what do? You read with a little kerosene lantern, and then you look at the stars. And at the end of the summer, I always got to enjoy the Perseid meteor shower. And I got to tell you, under those dark skies, reflected in the water, absolutely spectacular. So, life gets in the way, and you do a lot of things. Well, it was back many years later. I was in Dallas, Texas, and my wife bought me a little telescope. I think she regrets that first purchase, but that's what it is. But I went to a star party in 2000, met Tom Clark, but it was also the first time that I was exposed to the kind of dark skies that I grew up with. And I got really interested, did visual. But what really lit my fuse was, in my first article that I wrote for the magazine, was this. I spent an entire night, and I can highly recommend it, on the 82-inch McDonald Observatory telescope. So, and it was a moonless night, and we showed up, and there were 12 of us, so we were getting a lot of time. You got an astronomer to run the scope. We gave them a list of what we wanted to look at, and it was all cloudy, but you pay your money, which wasn't a lot. I think it was $100 per person. Can you imagine that? A night on an 82-inch telescope for $100, a good deal. But anyway, it was all clouded out. Hey, you do what you can. Miraculously, it cleared up, and we spent like 8 hours observing on that telescope, looking at planetary and everything. Anyway, after that, I was never the same, nor was I satisfied with my 8-inch telescope anymore, but that's it. But anyway, I wrote that, and I said, okay, I kind of enjoy writing about the experience as well. So you can see here with my mead, and Richard, I think I was ahead of the curve, because back then I was taking like 15-second exposures because I had a crappy mount, but I was combining lots and lots of them. So I understood that square root thing a little bit. So here I made Chiefland Astronomy Village was my home. I met Tom Clark, and my wife actually would come with me, and she'd go, we celebrated our 46th anniversary last year, nice trip to Europe and everything. Yeah, thank you. So she says, gosh, your astro nerd friends are like really nice. So she actually, yeah, the astro nerds. And actually she says, I prefer them to the other people. I said, yeah, that's why we go out there, the skies and everything else. But yeah, you can see, gosh, 10 years ago, boy, life, I'm not sure if it's the years and the mileage, but it takes its toll. But gradually, I would buy different telescopes, upgrade, and go through. And I got hooked on the imaging thing. I did do one session, like Richard talked about with that hand guiding. And, you know, mosquitoes were biting me, and I think I got like 15 seconds and said, oh, there's no way. And my friend Bill Williams said, be a man, Charlie. I'm like, sorry, I knew some people that were doing it. But as soon as the digital came along, I was like, okay, now I could do this. So, but at the beginning of digital, technology wasn't what it was. So this little meme in the top there, you teacher, lawyer, engineer, sleeping positions, astrophotographer, you were up all night. I mean, that was it. If you wanted to go, because it would crash and do this. I mean, and you know, Richard was very busy writing like all these different routines to keep up with all the equipment and everything, but it was a mess. Well, I'm happy to say now, yeah, like you said, it's all automated. So I can actually get sleep, which is good because I can't stay up all night anymore. I can also enjoy visual, and I can go around and enjoy the people as well. So I went through 2 years where I think I was clouded out every time I went for 2 years. Last year was a great year. But I actually had people invite me to speak at other people's store parties just so I wouldn't bring the clouds with me. It was that bad. I mean, it was, we had one where somebody won the astrophotography contest with an image of M42 they took to try and just to focus their scope. And that was the winning, it was that bad. Yes, it wasn't you, yes. It's a beautiful thing. I began to think I really had the curse of the cloud gods. But yeah, last year was a great year. So I got to image all this stuff. I got my sleep. I get to get back into visual and just tons of stuff. So I was like really excited. But now we're going to talk about the real people behind this. And it's interesting as we go through the years, some of these people have passed on. But one of the early people, and I think it's interesting, when you see somebody with a real passion for something and got energy and where they'll go. But when we first interviewed Sue French back in issue number 14, she said, she proclaimed, I'm not really good at anything. I just like to observe and I like to work through lists. Well, you can see where that led her to as a contributing editor for Sky and Telescope, Deep Sky Wonders. She went on and developed some programs for observatories, did some school programs, and became quite an astronomy communicator. But back when we first interviewed her, she was just, yeah, I don't have any real specialty. I just love looking at the stars, love working through lists, and sharing that love with other people. So some of these people really cut quite a niche. And the other one, Richard Berry, and I will say both Richard Berry and David Eicher were very kind to me. Like I say, my background, I've been a tennis pro. I've owned several different businesses, bookstores, wholesale plant and overseas export. Nothing on my agenda prepared me to be an editor for Amateur Astronomy magazine. And these gentlemen, both Richard Berry and David Eicher, were very kind, came alongside, let me know, yeah, you don't have to use every font in every issue that you have there, but gradually guided me through it. Richard Berry was one. Richard Berry goes back 5 decades, and he was the one who published Telescope Making Magazine, along with somebody else I'll introduce you to in a little bit. But he also, back when Richard started, you couldn't buy a C-Star. You couldn't buy pretty much anything. If you wanted a telescope, you made it. And he made the mirrors, he made the telescopes. When he got into CCD, the CCD imaging, it was hard to even buy a CCT. So he put out a book so you could make a CCD for about $350, a CCD camera. And they say, he estimates there were about 7,000 of them made. And then of course, you got to process. So he wrote a book, Astronomical Imaging Processing, how to build a telescope. And so Richard is one of those people that we can look back to as kind of a foundation for much of what we were able to do later. Well, I asked him how he got involved with Astronomy magazine, and it's interesting. So he goes, well, you know, it's interesting. I responded to an ad. I said, what do you mean? They ran an ad for a technical editor. And I responded, and he said, they sent me all these editorial tests and all those things. He goes, I completed them, sent them back in. I didn't hear anything for like 6 months, 9 months. A year later, the chief editor gave him a call, sent him out for an interview, and then he joined their staff and eventually became the managing editor for Astronomy magazine. Back then, Callback was very small, and you can see they were posting things and putting that magazine all together. And he never lost his passion for building telescopes and sharing, educating. He also has a love for alpacas, unusual guy, but he still builds a lot of his stuff. And you can see where we've come with the long focal lengths on the far upper right. Imagine putting that in your Honda Civic. So, but he is also very involved in the science of astronomy and photometric research and that sort of thing. His observatory was kind of wasted, unfortunately. The fire, not unlike the one we had, not as vast. 3 years ago or something like that, he's rebuilt since then. Fortunately, the alpacas were safe, so all good. But Richard is a mainstay. Again, he is one of those people that laid the foundation for us of development of CCD and telescope design, and continues on. So our next star person, interestingly, when we first heard about Pranvera Hyseni, it was back in 2015, and she wasn't very well known, but she was really making some waves. She was 15 years old, I think 15 years old at that time, and it was kind of like Sue French. Nobody knew about her, but she had clearly had a passion for astronomy and for sharing it with other people. Well, she lived in Palm Beach. She was in Kosovo. And she remembers back, she goes, when I was 3 years old, I was interested. My dad, it was actually a war zone at that time. And there was an eclipse, and her dad showed her the eclipse reflected in a bucket of water. So that's all it took for her for that initial interest. And she's come a long ways for there, but she started immediately. As soon as she learned something, she had to learn English. There weren't even any astronomy books in her native language, so she learned English so she could read about astronomy, and she began to share it with everybody. She went to schools, and she shared it on social media. So you may have mixed opinions about social media, but this young lady did it the right way. And through that, as she shared with other people, people wanted to help and back her. So Bressler and this company from Germany contributed 50 of these little refractors, which she went around and distributed to the different schools and taught them how to use it, taught them a little bit about astronomy, and that began to attract some attention, so you got media involved. And again, she's now 16, like 17 years old. Since then, her enthusiasm has been infectious. She's now a brand ambassador for Celestron. She's been able to travel literally all around the world. She's a PhD student at University of Southern California, and because of her, all that infectious enthusiasm, and it attracted a lot of attention, and she's responsible for the first observatory in her home country of Kosovo. And you can see it in the background in the lower right-hand corner. And there, when you do that, you also get to stand next to the prime minister of your country. So a young lady with a lot of enthusiasm that we could tell early on. This young lady is a ball of energy and is now a PhD student. Who knows what she's going to do in the future, but a fascinating person. Keep your eyes on her. She'll no doubt do a lot of things. So our next star person, Tony Hallis, we did a feature on him in issue number 5. How many, Tony used to hang out down here more. How many of you know Tony? Tony is a character, yeah. So, yeah, Tony sends me stuff and he goes, yeah, I'd increase the saturation on this, but I already got people cursing at me. So, yeah, Tony pushes the envelope on everything, but his background, interesting. So his first telescope. So a lot of people, we get feedback and go, yeah, I started out with a 3-inch Tasco, and from there, their interest went on. He bought an 8-inch Celestron, but it wasn't to look at the stars. He was a surf bum in California. It tells you he's a surf bum in California, and he had it on his balcony so he could look out and check out the waves, seeing it was a good day to surf. And he goes, one day, purely out of boredom, I pointed the thing up at Saturn and saw the rings. Well, we know what happens when you look at the rings of Saturn. It's like, okay, I'm hooked. So at that time, Tony was a professional photographer, and he worked in a photo lab. So he was going to start, he was one of these early people who said, I know everything. I know how to take photos. So he was going to go out and do some astrophotography. So he says, I went out, didn't polar line them out, I took 1, 2, and 4-minute images, and then he took it back to his lab to process that. And so Tony Hallis was early star trail master. So yeah, and then he's like, okay, I'm gonna have to learn a little bit more about that. This is different than standard photography. Well, Tony has come a long ways, needless to say, and he pushes the envelope, does these beautiful images, and I think he's one of the people that really started to push where you saw a lot more. I mean, people would take a picture of the dumbbell and you see the dumbbell, but not this outgassing of HA and everything else. Well, Tony does everything a bit extreme. And I've gotten a chance to get to know him quite well and spend a lot of time with him. When I was a director for a security company, part of my territory was South Florida, and my friend Bill Williams would invite me over. Whenever Tony was down, he'd be there. One, I loved home-cooked meal. Bill's wife is a great cook. But you see me there, I'm rather out of place, dressed a little too formally, but I never passed up an opportunity to sit down, spend some time with Tony, his wife Daphne, and the Williams family. Over the years, like I say, I've gotten to know him. Here's a couple of his other images. Again, you can see it really pushes the envelope to get as much in there, stuff that we never thought in the past was there. He would push, and one of the few people I know that hasn't moved to Pix Insights, still does all this processing in Photoshop. He's just done it so long, but he can do things in Photoshop that are just amazing. But you can see all the background stuff there that has become more common now, and as Richard said, that you get much more sensitive chips, you get faster optics, and more people can do it. But he was one of those pioneers that started doing that before it was commonplace to do it. He also does beautiful landscape photography, and he does some goofy images, and that makes people mad too sometimes. But he likes to play around with Photoshop and do all kinds of different things. Interesting story. So Tony is full of stories. You ever get to sit down, he plays flamenco guitar, and we were talking one night, and I said, so what's one of the kind of the wildest things that happened? He goes, just randomly. He goes, well, I used to process stuff in the lab. And he goes, you wear these white gloves so you didn't get fingerprints and stuff. So Daphne and I are in California in our apartment, and we get a knock on the door, and Daphne opens the door, and there's this police officer there with a shotgun, holding a shotgun, the other one, hand on his pistol. So Daphne calls Tony out, and Tony comes out of the lab, and apparently there had been, I don't know if it was an assault or something, but they were looking for somebody, and assault and a robbery, I think. And so Tony comes out of the lab, and the police officer says, "What's with the gloves?" And he goes, "Oh, so I don't leave fingerprints." Wrong answer, Tony. Yeah, he got serious for a moment. But when it comes to landscape photography, again, one of the people from the past, Wally, and the C is so it's Polka, and I massacred his name first time. He goes, "That's okay. Everybody does." He's from Ukraine, and he says, "Most people don't know me if you pronounce my name properly, Polka." But anyway, he was doing landscape photography far before the people are doing it with their DSLRs and that sort of thing. He did it with film. And Wally was a professional photographer, and he had an idea. He was going to go around and go to all our national parks, national monuments, and recognizable places, and did these beautiful, like I say, way back before these nighttime landscape images were a common thing. He was one of the pioneers. And he got a lot of recognition, so National Geographic got him to do some different series. He was spinning Life, Look, did all these different documentaries and things. But he is one of the people that kind of laid the groundwork. People said, wow, that's what's possible. And he put these really interesting, and I love this one, the False Kiva up there, but you can see the Grand Tetons. All these are like recognizable national monuments, and that was kind of his focus. That's one of my favorite, the Yellowstone there. But Wally had a great eye, and there's a lot more involved in that, particularly when you're doing film and you're doing these longer exposures, and you have to be gifted at developing. But the key thing is to find and have an eye for setting up that foreground so you get an interesting image, and Wally was superb at doing it. His story is fascinating. Again, moved to Canada and is now still resides, I think, in California. but you get a chance to read his full interview. Fascinating life. So I come to a couple of people that I want to recognize who have gone on before us, so to speak, and one of them certainly is Tippy Dioria. I got to know Tippy not just through the Winter Star Party here, but at Chiefland, where he would hang out. And Tippy was amazing. He, back there you can see in the top center, my friend Bill Williams actually has a patent for that cold camera that used dry ice. So when you want to appreciate the technology you have, like Richard said, you can hold your phone and do stuff. Back then, it was tough going. You had to be kind of a pioneer. But Tippy was a great communicator, great sense of humor, but also very serious about the hobby and very knowledgeable. Did some great presentations. That's one back in 2014. Did anybody see that one with the dirty snowball? People still talk about that with the dry ice, dirty snowball with the comets. Was clowning around with that. That is an unusual optical design with the eyepiece at the bottom there. Obviously at zenith, not very effective. But he was recognized and actually has an asteroid named after him. We knew him as the Celestial Pirate. He and his wife were both very involved. She was a serious observer, and he served in the Navy on a submarine. I think that's where he got his start. But he was also, like I say, a fixture. This was the other one that people talk about all the time, the astronomical distances. He had a way of just doing these creative ways to illustrate stuff, and here he used toilet paper rolls as they're going out and talking about astronomical distances. So Tippy, a really neat guy. John Dobson teased him about one of the scopes that he made that had like a styrofoam tube called his coffee cup telescope. And Tippy also had a hobby of observing volcanoes, active volcanoes. And they did a documentary, went with, I think, Stephen O'Meara, and did a documentary on one down in South America. But interesting guy, multi-dimensional. And again, if you didn't know Tippy, you can get to know him a little bit by the in-depth interview that we did him in that issue. Bottom left, right, with my friend Bill Williams there at Chiefland Astronomy Village. And here with Billy Dodd, the man who's founded Chiefland Astronomy Village, and he's speaking at his memorial after Billy Dodd passed on. But tip of the hat to Tippy, an incredible individual. If you knew him, you miss him. If you didn't, I encourage you, read his full interview and get to know him a little bit better. An amazing individual. So Barbara Wilson also passed away in 2019, was somebody who was instrumental in deep sky observing. Barbara and her husband Buster are a reminder. I think she was involved in the hobby in a little bit different way. Some people are, but a lot of the people here, I mean, we see people are imaging, they're using the new technologies and everything, and that is wonderful. Really, I love seeing all these new things, but I think sometimes we forget the amazing things behind it. So Barbara was just fascinated with the science behind what she saw, and you have to do that. If you're searching for faint fuzzies, it's not about the wow factor of this color image. It's seeing something that very few human beings have seen, understanding what that represents. So I just read a couple of quotes and gives you an idea of Barbara's mindset. Started out with a little telescope. They went to the Texas Star Party, saw a 20-inch, some views through a 20-inch, and her husband Buster, she said, we got to get with those. Came back with a 20-inch, and she became one of the premier observers in amateur astronomy. So she said at the 1992 Texas Star Party, we saw the jet in M87, which is not easy, with the 20-inch, and also a newly discovered object that was receding from us at 90% the speed of light. The quasar HS 1946 is 12 billion light years away. Think about that. Physically seeing some 12 billion light years away. And she said 5 years ago, when I first saw 3C 273, a quasar, in a ultra-dense galaxy, I couldn't sleep that night. So she saw this little dim light, and because she's applying that background knowledge of what this is, she said, I couldn't sleep that night. I lay awake in the tent and said, Buster, do you realize we just saw an object 2 billion light years away? And now I've seen an object 90% of the way out to the edge of the universe. So I encourage people, as you get deeper in the hobby, don't leave behind the knowledge of what you're looking at, because it will, I guarantee, add to another dimension to what you're doing. Barbara understood that, amazing. And they also started, anybody heard of the Ain't No list? Yeah. So she developed this list with some other serious observers of the Ain't No. It's like you can't, the things you couldn't possibly see. And actually they did observe a couple, had to get verification. But it's funny, look up the Ain't No list and you'll understand Barbara a little bit better. So it brings us to another person that's certainly changed, and our magazine would not exist without it. How many people do have or have had a Dobsonian telescope? Yeah, thanks to this man. How many people have done sidewalk astronomy? Yeah, I mean, that was his passion. And the interesting thing about John Dobson, really weird views about cosmology, but he came up with this simple design to have a big aperture mirror. And the man who wrote this memorial to him, Mel Bartel, says, I remember as a young kid, he was interested in astronomy, but they had fairly small telescopes. And there was an article in the paper saying this guy, John Dobson, was coming. And he had like I think a 24-inch and like a 30-inch telescope. Well, that was unheard of. And he got so excited, he and his friend rode there, and he goes, I was excited when I saw the telescope. I jumped out of my friend's station wagon before it stopped rolling, went tumbling down the road. But they observed all night, and he said sometime after midnight, John Dobson's going in, goes into a tent, or I think it was a VW camper. And they said, well, gosh, we'd like to observe more. He goes, oh yeah, just observe and just put it in this position when you're done. But that was John Dobson. He was all about showing other people the universe and sharing what he knew about it. But he definitely was an interesting pioneer in the field, shared what he knew, loved showing other people. And the other thing is kind of interesting. I mean, I admit I'm kind of a techie. I love the high-tech telescopes and all the equipment. He was into, let's make this affordable for everybody. I think he would like the C-Star, to be quite honest, but he would use, the glass for his telescopes came from just leftover portholes. So yeah, you get a porthole, polish the mirror, and he'd make mirrors from it because you buy it for cheap. So he used like junk parts, scrap plywood, and he made these instruments that were really incredible. So he brought astronomy to a whole lot of people. And back at that time, we didn't have C-Stars yet, so he was kind of one of those people that opened this hobby up to people who otherwise might not be able to afford it. John Davis, somebody who wrote for us for many years, and he's a unique communicator. So John Davis, nicest guy, suffered from Parkinson's at the end, but he could write, and he brought you to the eyepiece. That's not easy to do. How do you take something that you see and recreate that experience of somebody reading on a piece of paper, gets to feel like they're there with you through that whole adventure? Well, John Davis did that. Very passionate about doing it. Did our Deep Sky Treasures for many years. At the very end, he was still going out to Aruna Hill where he would go to observe, but it was hard to find John when he wasn't talking to people. People flocked around him. He just had one of those personalities, and we definitely miss him. Another one, Don Parker. He was a fixture here at the Winter Star Party. He was a near neighbor of me and Carl Gables for a while there. How many of you knew Don? You had the pleasure of knowing Don. Unbelievable. First of all, the first thing you recognized about Don was his sense of humor. He also suffered from some type of arthritis, and he would never complain. All the time I knew Don, I never heard him complain about it. But it was a challenge. Don, his name is synonymous with high quality planetary observing and imaging. A lot of his information he gathered was used scientifically, very involved with Alpo. And he said the thing that he did, you know, I kind of like Mike. I have trouble with my attention, so I have to do new things. Okay, I'm going to do some imaging. I'm going to do some observing and do this. It's some people can focus in one area and really do it well and do it to where they're really contributing. Well, for a full year, he observed the polar caps on Mars and the receding of that polar cap. If you're going to do science, you got to be that intense about stuff. I would have trouble holding my interest. Don did that, and he said that process taught him to love the science behind it. Don, amazing individual, also did some great presentations here, surrounded by people he loved right up to the end. That's his 16-inch scope, made his telescopes too. Again, a lot of these people, they didn't just buy off the shelf. And he had some features on Mars named after him, but his information, when submitted, was actually used in scientific papers and everything else. So Don Parker, an amazing gentleman, anesthesiologist by trade, but an absolute gem for our hobby. So it's interesting because we're amateur astronomy, so people go, well, why'd you feature Rick and Dolores Hill? Dr. Rick Hill, he's a professional astronomer involved in the Catalina Sky Survey, and he tracks those near-Earth objects, those things that could crash into us, cause real problems. As a matter of fact, there was one object that fell in the Nubian desert, and they didn't even spot it till 19 hours before that happened, and hit with like the impact of a 1,000 megaton bomb or something. I mean, there's a lot. When you get a big asteroid impacts Earth, and I said, Rick, so what's the chance of that happening again? He goes, probably 1 in 10 within the next 40 years getting one that size. The catastrophic ones are doing a lot of stuff. So when they're doing that research and how to divert these things, it could be a really important thing. Well, Rick was involved with all of that in, 2020, I think it was. He actually discovered, I think, 70% of all the near-Earth asteroids up in the during part of the Catalina survey team. The interesting thing, they're both affiliated with the University of Arizona. His wife Dolores studies them once they hit the ground, so her expertise is meteorites, and she was involved in the OSIRIS-REx program, if you're familiar with that. But the cool thing about them, so they're these serious scientists. They love amateur astronomy. They come out to field. They come to these different places, and they are as excited looking through an eyepiece as you and I are. A lot of times you see these professional astronomers, they're looking at data and studying these different things. Well, Rick actually involved a little bit more, but they actually go there, and this was at the Texas Star Party. I spent some time with them at the Peach State. But it's kind of refreshing to see these professionals that love the aspect of amateur astronomy that we do as well. So fascinating background that they have in the full interview we did with them. And there's just a public service announcement. In case you missed this, it's official. As long as it says from Santa, you can buy yourself a telescope. So for Christmas. Now, in case you missed that opportunity, I will tell you, it doesn't work for Valentine's Day. Came from Cupid. Bad move. That definitely is a conflict. So here's the thing, though. I find, my wife, she likes purses and shoes. So I got telescopes, eyepieces, stuff. She likes purses and shoes. We've got this closet the size of a small bedroom, and I got thrown out of that. And but to add insult to injury, I had to build a wall for, to hold purses and shoes and stuff. Well, I show up, and she gets purses that have a bag for the purse. So don't ask me. But anyway, a bag for the purse, and then she brings me out, and I go, I don't remember that. And she goes, oh, I've had that for a long time. So I found that works my way, too. I don't remember that telescope. Oh, I've had this. I put it tuck it away in the garage for a couple months. I had that for a long time. So, yeah, works both ways. Santa, so it works for Christmas, does not work for Valentine's Day. All right, so Peter and Deborah Caravallo. Interesting, because did anybody remember Desktop Universe back when? It was the first one I remember that had actual photographs, and it was really cool. So he was one of the people that developed that. He's a professional optician, and I didn't know that much about him other than they took cool photographs. And the neat thing about doing these interviews is you get that three-dimensional view of who these people were. So I knew they had nice telescopes. I knew they took pretty pictures. So when we did the interview, I also found out they're both race car drivers. Like all of us, yeah. They like chasing each other around the road, and they're both private pilots, yeah. So I was beginning to feel a little bit inadequate, you know. I was like, yeah, but I know Bill Williams. But they do some phenomenal stuff. Actually, so Deborah came to work for him at his optical engineering company as a marketing person and photographer, and then they formed a more permanent relationship there. But they did some really interesting things. One of the things they did, by the way, Peter says it's not a real telescope if you can't stand in it. So they build big stuff. But they enjoyed it was 2018, the eclipse there, in a rather unique way. So they're up in Canada, they flew their plane right to the path of totality and viewed it from the airplane. Oh, okay, it works for me. Then they said, yeah, 2 hours later we flew home and had champagne. I'm like, nice, I was stuck in traffic for 7 hours. So Peter does some amazing stuff building telescopes. And if you're interested, he restored this classic Zeiss telescope, and we detailed it step by step. Let's detail it step by step in issues 108 and 109. Fascinating project, really interesting guy. They really do take nice photos, and they got the focal length to be able to do it. So that's Peter and Deborah. Again, if you want to read their article and go in depth, they're a fascinating couple. So. Next on our list was this. I caught the attention of this gal. Actually, Marcella sent me some images from some of her people. So Marcella Bodie, again, using social media in a way which is really neat and creative, she got together over in Europe. There isn't not a lot of star parties. You can't get together and stuff like this. So she created this group on Facebook specifically for females interested in astronomy and different types of pursuits, and they created this really supportive group, and they encouraged, so there was no snobbery. They encouraged the ones just getting started, but they also encouraged it. Like for instance, this gal Valentina, she actually paints, and I'll show you some of her paintings, and you will think that they're astro photos, just phenomenal. And we have there Luca got on our cover. She sold more. We don't do a lot of retail, but she did sell more covers than when I was on the cover. So, but this group of young ladies is amazing. But Marcella did something, she went a step beyond. So she created this group, really great supportive group on social media, but then she went the extra mile and she began to get together. And again, they don't have a lot of star parties in Italy where she got started and around Europe. So she began to visit these different people, get them together, break bread together, go on these a tour, an observatory, whatever. So it began to create a real sense of community beyond what it was. And they also expanded to include, and you can see, they do very high quality astrophotography, and all of them were working pretty much independently and didn't know anybody else that did what they did. So she did a phenomenal job bringing these people together, and then they encouraged them too. I mean, they share poetry about astronomy. They, hey, anything astronomy related, they encourage. I don't have a CCD or a telescope. We'll take pictures with your digital camera. In the bottom right there, you can see Valentina, and in the background, they look like astrophotos. Those are her paintings. So I mean, think how closely you have to look at an image to be able to, again, reproduce and paint or whatever. But fascinating group of people who do high quality. Again, Christina Salina was one of the people that we featured. Anybody ever tried to do image 240, the Spaghetti Nebula? Probably the toughest thing I've ever attempted. I think it took me an hour just to get it set, because the chip was a square chip and it had to be perfectly centered to get it in there. But very difficult. So very high-end. Christina is one member of the group there. Luca does mostly narrowband because she's in a light-polluted area. This is the image that caught my attention from her initially. 63 hours. I was proud because I tend to go to a lot of images, and I think I put together a 9-hour image of the Pleiades and got some of the background stuff. And then Luca sent me this image. I'm like, oh crap, okay. Back to the drawing board. 63 hours, beautiful background. And again, she does just beautiful work. Flavia is interesting because she's a very light polluted area, just outside of Florence, I think. And so she does all narrowband, but she and her dogs get in their observatory in fairly modest equipment and do very high quality astrophotography. You can see Nicoletta, you got to introduce to Nicoletta in the interview, and you can see from her profile picture she's shy, retiring, but not very typical of Italians. But again, Nicoletta was working on her own, got together with these other ladies and was encouraged to do that. Rosanna Miani, you can see her, she's on Facebook pretty regularly. She does high quality, high resolution solar stuff, and she's been actually posting a lot recently, but yeah, look her up and check her out. But all these people banded together, used social media, and Uli, I will tell you, it's a beautiful place overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea. She imaged that cosmic question mark, sent it our way. But again, it's not a permanent observatory or anything else, doing very high quality work from a beautiful location. I could do that. So next star person, I'm going to try and pick it up here. Alan Dyer, most of you are familiar with him. I got to know Alan both down in Australia and speaking at star parties with him. And you see the top right Fujinian, that is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. So it's an aircraft chair. You get these giant Fujinians, on your eyes. Now this is down in Australia, so you get to surf the southern hemisphere, and it's got a joystick. So you can surf around once you get that brick, and you're surfing around. They had to get a cattle prod to get me out of that thing down there. So Alan is phenomenal. He's an author, he's a speaker. He has done about everything there is to do. His specialty is, and he uses DSLRs, so he's not using CCDs, CMOS cameras, but he does phenomenal things with it. He's contributed several articles and a prolific writer. He has written I don't know how many books, but highly recommend his How to Photograph Solar Eclipses, and his Nightscapes and Time Lapse is probably the most comprehensive book I've ever read on the subject. You want to do that. And Alan is like 9 years my senior and makes me feel like an old guy. He has more energy. He's like nonstop, does beautiful nightscape photography, great eye, and very good at capturing eclipses. So our next star person, interesting, and again, somebody I just saw their image associated with a name. We did some interviews on her, and here's this young lady, and she's an astrophotographer, nightscape photographer. She's now like a tour guide, so you can go and tour guide. She takes you exotic places where you can do nightscapes. She's also a pilot, and has this interesting, like I say, does beautiful photography as well. And on top of that, she is a mom to two amazing young girls. One of them's a junior sky cadet or something like that. But you can see from the montage on the left, but on the right, what makes her special isn't just the technique, is she has a great eye for setting up stuff. That's a beautiful landscape image, incredibly prolific. I think this was just like, I took some of the images that I had from her for the last year. She wrote an article on one of her trips down to Bolivia and what she did there, but she really has a very good creative eye and puts it all together and does a great job. Where she is in Canada, she's actually fairly light polluted, but she puts all this together, does a fascinating thing. She's also a meteorologist, so she knows when it's going to be clear. That's a good thing. That helps a lot. But yeah, fascinating person, and her website is Weather and Sky if you want to check out some of her stuff. Absolutely beautiful images. So Christopher Go, you've probably seen his planetary images. I mean, when I look at it, it looks like it had to be in orbit or something. Richard talked about lucky imaging. He's one of those guys. I got to spend some time with Chris. His family couldn't get over there in California at an event for Celestron. He actually did a live, demonstration of what he does and how he captures these things. But just absolutely phenomenal work. Although I would say, Tim, the image of Mars I saw in your scope the other night was getting in the ballpark for that. If you haven't spent some time observing the planets from down here, I mean, the Winter Star Party is one of the best places. It's very steady. You need steady skies. You can even be a little murky, but you need steady skies. But anyway, where he is, he has water all around him, so it works out really well for him imaging the planets. But Chris Go is phenomenal, uses C14 and uses what they call that lucky imaging, grabbing these frames of when it gets steady, and does work that you would think would have to come from a spacecraft. Chris, fascinating, he owns a furniture manufacturing company, so he gets over here a fair amount. And if you ever get a chance to hear him speak, please do yourself a favor and show up. But yeah, there's some more of Chris's images. And Richard Wright. I won't talk a lot about Richard because you got to meet Richard, but at some other venues you don't. But you may not have met the Richard when he's in his royal garb, because once he grabs the scepter, that calm demeanor. Yeah. No, I met Richard way back when I was first the editor of Amateur Astronomy, and a lot of people like, who is this guy? Richard was always very kind and always made me feel welcome. But got to know Richard a little bit more now at where he calls home for his astronomy home. And that was fun. We'd have an imaging contest, and we crowned the person who won the imaging contest. And Richard did a great job with that. But I enjoy following Richard and in his travels and seeing his stuff. Well, Richard occasionally throws us a bone with an article, because one of the other things, the side he didn't mention in there, is brilliant with software design. Richard also has a real penchant. I think he could have been a writer and been that his primary occupation as well. He really does a good job of communicating those things. Yeah, check out his blog, because it really is good and interesting stuff. But Richard also does outreach, which I appreciate. This hobby, if it's going to expand, we've got to reach out to other people. And I was fascinated by this, and I asked Richard, did you stage that? Because obviously up front, you got the young lady looking through the telescope. Okay, that speaks outreach. But it's the background that struck me. Look what's happening in the background. So somebody who looked at the planet, had no idea what that bright star was, now knows it's a planet, and he's pointing it out to the other person. So you got the person who just learned teaching somebody else, and that's the magic of doing public outreach. So good on you, Richard. Keep going. Does beautiful astrophotography, and he loves Starbucks. So I found that image I was telling you about, Richard. So that's the one in the Gothic quarter of Barcelona, and I think I sent that to him. But this is the one in Valletta, Malta, and I got on the port there. So you have to go, now you have to go to visit this, because they have the best coffee of any Starbucks. So I looked and I was like, that looks like a Starbucks symbol. So I got the telephoto lens. It's like, yeah. But what makes it even better, this place right there, the red door, the best wood brick oven, wood-fired pizza I've ever eaten in my life. So Starbucks and great pizza, what could go wrong? So yeah, over the years got to know Richard pretty well, and we share another passion. We put the G in astronomy. That's the gastronomy. You know, they're that close. There's got to be a link. Yeah. So yeah, we get together and dine, and he does beautiful nightscape. And this is one of my favorites. Richard, is that from Mauna Kea? Yeah, beautiful image. Love that image. And you get it's like the foreground, and then you see down below. Really cool. So Richard, contrary to what people say, does put eyepieces in telescopes sometimes. He does love his telescope. His wife gets jealous occasionally. So, and this was one of his recent ones he sent to me, and it's really cool. So what is this image? So 1396, right? But what's the common name for it?
Elephant trunk.
Elephant trunk. Well, turned sideways, he said, my wife said it looks just like Smaug the dragon. I can't get that out of my head when I see it now. It's like, yeah, how did it ever become the elephant's trunk, man? That's Smaug. So yeah, really cool. But Richard's one of our cosmic explorers, and like I say, you all probably know a lot better than some. One other, and I'll move through pretty fast, is John Talbot, and he ditched my talk to go to Key West, so I'm just going to say bad things about him. But no, John Talbot is doing a series for us. John is amazing, knows like every subroutine and picks insight. If you missed his thing, check out the recording. He does beautiful nightscape photography. You may not know, but he was a hurricane hunter. So he flew, I think, 573 hurricanes. So when everybody else was fleeing from hurricanes, he would fly his plane into the center of a hurricane. So yeah, crazy stuff. So he did retire. I asked him, you gonna keep your pilot's license? He goes, oh, hell no. I flew into, for 30 years, I flew into the hurricanes and I'm safe, so we're good. But interesting individual. He's there with his family. That's the plane that would fly into it, into hurricanes. We get together on a regular basis. We enjoyed in 2017 that eclipse together. His wife Janice is down here today as well, but he does beautiful astrophotography, nightscape photography. But what I want to talk about, what puts him in this category, he's doing a series for us on these out-of-the-way imaging targets. When you do this for a while, eventually you'll get to the point where, okay, I've imaged that. Well, when you get new equipment, you can re-image it. You go, okay, I got to re-image it now, or a different focal length. But eventually you get so, okay, I've done most of the bright, flashy stuff. Where do I go from here? So he started collaborating with some scientists and these potential planetary nebulae. Well, it takes a lot of imaging time to do it. And he's actually had some discoveries, been named in journals. But the crazy thing about it, he's got a home observatory, so it makes it possible to do this. But he'll shoot maybe 40, 50 hours, and he doesn't know if he has anything. You put it together and process it and everything else. But the cool thing about it, this is one of the things in his pro-am collaboration in Auriga, and this guy Dana Patrick, so he sends him this list of stuff he just gets off these surveys. He's not sure if it's something or not, could be. But nobody has ever taken a color photograph of this stuff. So John's like, okay, they're doing all the science on this side. You give me the coordinates, and he comes up with it, and they love it because they've got a journal, but it's just a journal. And now John supplies a color photograph for it to go along with it. So he actually gets a name in the journal, but really cool stuff. And I'm going to wrap up really fast here, but I got a good friend, and actually his father was a friend of mine in Nashville, recently passed away. His son Jeffrey, who he got going with, goes into these super deep and collaborates. So I talked with somebody else about this. Nashville is not the perfect place to take images. He's a little bit outside, but he coordinates with somebody else who will take some of the other narrowband images they put together. And this big escape around the 1396 and some other stuff there is 174 hours of data. Well, when you do that, you can pull out all kinds of stuff in the background, like say that's lost in the noise. In the old days, yeah, we just moved the slider till it went black so you didn't have to see. But absolutely phenomenal stuff that Jeff does. And he also, yeah, this one around the Heart Nebula. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff there that you may not have known was there. And this one, in this image, he went deep, and one of his friends said, what's that thing up there? You can see where the green is. And they go, you know, that might be a planetary nebula, but it's not, hasn't been cataloged. So they sent it off and went, and interesting, his dad was in the hospital. They named it Don's Nebula, but it actually came back, and it hadn't been cataloged before, so they actually had a discovery. From very long, deep, wide field, he collaborated with some other people, and actually discovered a new planetary nebula. Dave Tosterson, I'm going to skip through that. Mike Lockwood. So we got an ode to Mike Lockwood. Again, I'll go quickly because most of you know him. If you haven't looked at his night or his illuminated eyepiece, that little scope, we were seeing stuff down in Vela that I couldn't believe we saw. Well, you can see the cat's paw up there. Absolutely phenomenal. So before you leave, you have to run by. Mike is very gracious, allows you to go by and look through his telescope, but you will see things that you never expected to see visually through this little short telescope. Mike is a phenomenal optician. Most of you know he also likes beer. So we went to Mike's place. He invited us out, you know, because I think it was 2020, wasn't it? So there was no, star parties were being canceled and everything. Mike says, come on up. We've got a couple of people. We'll go up there and observe. Well, I think Canada was on fire and all this smoke was coming in. So we couldn't see much even with the special eyepiece. But we did still have beer because that's one of his other passions. So I will say we stayed up very late, not observing, but we killed all those. We went through quite the assortment of beer. That was truly, yes, absolutely. That was good stuff. Mike has a really neat shop up there. You want to talk to him ever about solar panels, has an amazing array. But one other thing you may not know about Mike, so you know he loves beer, you know he's an optician, you know he does the night vision stuff. He is also an incredible audiophile. I don't think people know that about him, but has an amazing audio. I mean, we're talking amazing. Yeah. So, yeah, there's one more element that, Mike, you may not know about. So, anyway, just a reminder as we wrap this up, that the hobby is absolutely amazing. The equipment is remarkable and getting more and more so. But it's really the people and the whole experience of getting together at a star party and with other people who observe. So purpose to live in the moment, continue to expand your knowledge and skills with a balance of preparation, that's some of the research in the background, and inspiration. Enjoy the wonders of the universe on our terrestrial ball. But these are images taken here from the star party. This is an incredible place and landscape that surrounds us. So take time to absorb the beauty around us, contemplate its nature, strive to expand your understanding of the natural world and your relationship and place within it. So go that extra step, learn a little bit about what you're observing as well. Enjoy the cosmos with an attitude of expectant discovery. If I had to describe what all these cosmic explorers had in common, it was that. The expectation of discovering something new, expanding their knowledge. And while here, get to know and hang out with other cosmic explorers, and I promise you, your life will be more interesting. So that is it. There was a quick pass through about 25 of the 150 we profiled, so thank you. And if anybody wants to find out the full story behind these folks, I do have some thumb drives with first 30 years of our publication, all in digital format, for $100. So if you want it before you go, grab one. You can get the full background on these folks and about 125 others, as well as observing, star parties, and image processing. So thank you all. I appreciate your attention. And